So like at one point you're negotiating, what's going to stay at LiveRamp, what's going to go to Axiom. And I'm negotiating against my boss's boss, who ultimately like had the ability to, I guess, fire me. So like that structure doesn't work because I'm like pushing hard for LiveRamp against this person who is in my org. It was just very odd. And I think
that's so interesting.
it was at what point we had this other lawyer come from Axiom to LiveRamp to help the LiveRamp side. And we were on a call together and we would be advocating for LiveRamp. And he would be saying like, no, like on the call with the brothers, like, Andrew has no idea what he's talking about this. And I like to say, no idea what he's talking about. And then he would mute and be like, you're totally right. I totally agree with you, but I gotta take the other side on this. Like, what the hell, you know?
How do you chart a path to general counsel before the age of 35 while staying open to reinvention, learning to navigate different company cultures, and managing through massive industry shifts? Today on The Abstract, I am joined by my friend Andrew Epstein, General Counsel of Demandbase, where he leads the company's legal, trust, governance, and ops teams. His career has spanned big law, some big transactions, and multiple in-house roles, all grounded in a sort of mindset of curiosity, intention, and ownership. We're going to talk today a little bit about some of the career bets that he made early on, how he built credibility quickly, and what it means to lead legal today in a really fast and changing market. Andrew, welcome to this episode of The Abstract.
Thank you for having me, Tyler. I'm pumped. I've been listening for a while, so I'm glad to be on it.
Yeah, I mean, I know you've got a lot of friends who've been on. Andrew Woods is a great episode as well. We're going to beat him today, though. We'll get more listens, I think.
Yeah, well, as Andrew Woods and I have a running competition on another podcast, so he's beating me on that one. So I'm coming for him on The Abstract.
Well, I mean, I can put a little bit of ad spend behind it, you know.
There you go.
Jokes aside, I don't actually start every episode with folks' journeys through law school, but you were really intentional about where you went to law school and the sort of approach that you took then with some other decisions while you were there. I think it's useful. I think there are actually some folks who are listening who are thinking about if they should go into law and trying to make some decisions like that. How did you approach the decision to go to law school, and how do you think that choice influenced your sort of early trajectory?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was at undergrad at Berkeley, I kind of knew pretty early on that I wanted to go to law school. The question was, what would that journey look like for me? And I think I ended up graduating Berkeley a semester early, and so in 3.5 years, for personal reasons, actually, my mom at the time had gotten really sick. I grew up in LA, and I went down to take care of my mom, and so I had taken a 1.5 years kind of between school. I went and worked for a nonprofit. They have Unlock for breast cancer, actually, where my job was to be a walker coordinator. I was literally signing people up for the San Francisco walk, helping them on their journey, helping them fundraise, doing a bunch of cold calls. And so that has helped me in my career, working kind of like Avon Walk. I worked at Nordstrom's, kind of these like service industry jobs, but I knew that I wanted to eventually go to law school. And when I was doing that, I knew that I wanted to be on the East Coast for the first part of my career, specifically in New York. And so I was pretty intentional about going to the best law school on the East Coast, which at the time that what I got into was GW. And so I made the decision to go there. I know it's not New York, but I knew that it was a good feeder into the work, New York firms and another type of work in New York. And I knew there would be like unique opportunities there in DC as a law student. So that's kind of what led me on that path.
You did actually take advantage of sort of unique opportunities in DC. I think, most folks after their first year or second year, they're thinking about government sort of internships, big law. You went in-house with the Washington Nationals for the summer. That's pretty cool. Tell us about how you got that opportunity and how it ended up sort of shaping your journey then later in law school.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's part of, I think what you and I will talk about in a little bit is kind of taking a risk and taking a non-traditional path. And it's very traditional as a first year law student to, a couple months in, there's a on-campus kind of recruiting thing where you go and mostly go and clerk for a judge. And there's no knock for people who go and clerk for judging. Like, that's amazing. I knew I didn't want to do that. And so the question was like, what would I do? If you don't sign up for something like that, you kind of have to apply to a bunch of things over time. And you're coming towards the end of your 1L year. It's pivotal that you get an internship. And I didn't have anything until weeks before finals, honestly. And my friends had gotten things. And I knew I was holding out because I had heard of this job kind of like towards the back half of the semester. And I got an opportunity to interview with the GC, this guy, awesome guy named Damon Jones at the time of the Washington Nationals. And I knew it was going to be really competitive. I went in to the interview and I just talked about why I wanted to be in the office of a GC, in a GC's office. Obviously, being at a baseball team is amazing, but I think a lot of folks before me, and I know this because Damon told me this, went in and talked about how much they love baseball and like this guy's batting average and their favorite player and this and that. And it's like, you're not interviewing to be a scout, like you're interviewing to be a lawyer, right? So I talked about how I thought in this 3-person legal team that I had an opportunity for a lot of impact and to see a lot of unique things. And that obviously resonated with him, and I got that job. And I was full-time my 1L summer, and then my 2L year, I basically took a lighter course load and worked Mondays and Fridays at the Nats office, which was super cool because the office was at the stadium. And so specifically like for day games, you would go out and watch the last 3 innings, on the clock, which was a good thing to do.
That's awesome. Do you feel like that experience helped you stand out at all then when you went to interview for sort of like big law opportunities? I mean, I imagine there can't be that many folks walking in the door with office of the GC at a baseball team on their resume.
Yeah, certainly. I absolutely think it did. I did well in school. I was not the best student coming out of GW, but I think I did well enough to get a few interviews at on-campus recruiting at the time. And I do think part of that was I had this different thing on my resume that I could talk about. And again, it was like, how do you talk about that? Yes, that got you into the door, but I didn't just like, maybe I talked about baseball for 30 seconds of it or something, but then I actually talked about what I learned and what I did. And it gave me this opportunity to go and get my 2L summer associate job, which is the job that I ended up taking after school at O'Melveny and Myers. I think in some ways because my interview stood out, for my background and kind of like the type of work that I had managed, pretty early on in my legal career.
I think you were also pretty intentional about picking a firm like O'Melveny, or you had slightly different criteria than maybe other folks. Was it just sort of like, how can I pick the firm that has the, top starting salary? Tell us about why you chose O'Melveny in New York.
Yeah, again, so I knew I wanted to be in New York. I grew up in LA. I went to undergrad in the Bay. I knew I was most likely going to head back to California at some point, but I wanted to start my career in New York for a number of reasons. One, I think I learned pretty early on in law school that I did not want to be a litigator. And I think that law school really trains you to be a litigator. There's not a lot of classes that you can take or opportunities that you get where you're more of a corporate or a transactional attorney. The Nats certainly was more of the corporate transactional side. Obviously, you can take contracts and some VC classes, and there are business law, there are opportunities like that. But I knew I wanted to start in New York. I knew that I wanted to work for a firm that had offices all over the country, particularly that was LA or West Coast based, which O'Melveny is. And that would give me the chance to work with partners in the LA office and the SF office and the London office and the New York office, so that I can diversify my practice, but also have my hooks into California kind of when I knew that there was going to be the high likelihood that I'd want to return.
What did you end up focusing on in your practice? I mean, I know, eventually you sort of built a practice around privacy or data. But what was it like in the early days and how did you sort of diversify the different practice areas you were working on as well?
Yeah, I actually didn't really start the privacy work until I moved in house. It was
Oh, interesting.
at
Okay.
the tail end of O'Melveny I did, but privacy wasn't really a thing. And then, I mean, it was just starting to become a practice in these law firms. And I worked on the privacy front in the last maybe year before I left. I worked for this honestly genius partner who I think she has since left. She was the GC of a healthcare company for a while. I don't know where she is now. I haven't even probably told her like how impactful she was to me at the firm. But she was just so smart, and I loved working on a few projects that she had for me. She came on to help build the privacy practice in 2016. But before that, I was working mostly for the capital markets group and some M&A work. Um, and again, that was somewhat intentional, right? You had 16 people in our summer associate class, and Melbourne was known and is known as a litigation powerhouse. They were building out the transactional group and the capital markets group in New York specifically. They had poached this kind of rainmakers type partner from Sherman and Sterling, and he was building out the group. And I hitched kind of my wagon to his name was Mike, to Mike and his team. And I wanted to become in that summer. And then I wanted to become Mike's guy during that summer. And and because he got kind of like the selection of summer associates. And when I joined Melvany, I was working on his deals, but it also, with the nature of transactional practice, capital markets practice, we did a lot of bank side work, some issuer side work, IPOs, follow-ons, secondaries, things like that. But there are these ebbs and flows because you're either on a deal or multiple deals or you're not. And so I knew it would give me the opportunity to say, hey, Mike, can I go work for so-and-so partner in the SF office on one of his deals or her deals? Can I work on so-and-so partner in the LA office? And it was great. Sometimes it ended up biting me in the ass, frankly, because like I would be on an LA deal, a New York deal, and a London deal at the same time. And like
Tough time
sleeping
zones.
during that period is challenging. But it also allowed me, to go home to LA to see friends and family and be able to be in an office. The same with my girlfriend at the time, wife now, is from the Bay. And so I'd be able to go to San Francisco and kind of do that work. But I kind of centered it around like, what are these smaller practices where I could have an impact and not just be just another person or another kind of cog at the firm, a large firm. And so when I proved myself to Mike and to David, who was another partner there, who I'm, and very much is a mentor and a friend, they allowed me to run deals much earlier on than I think I would have gotten at some of these more traditional transactional powerhouse firms where there's more of a wait your turn type of approach.
What was it that motivated you to want to go in-house then? Besides the fact that in retrospect or in hindsight, you got to work with Vanessa Wu, another podcast guest who's amazing. And I'm sure that was an incredible experience. We can talk about that. But what was it that made you think, okay, I want to go in-house and try that side of practicing law?
Yeah, I knew as much as I liked the work in the capital markets group, capital markets, certainly like during that time, is very much precedent based. Like, what are other people in the space doing? What other risk factors are companies listing out in this space? Do your research. There's very kind of set rules. I have always liked to like color outside the lines a little bit, I think, and it was hard for me to build my practice out of something that was so rigid. And so I kind of knew I wanted to be more creative. I wanted to have this opportunity to impact a business beyond just legal and sort of kind of set your own kind of rules. And that's why I started the privacy work with one of the partners there, because it was 2016, 17. GDPR wasn't even out yet. and
Mm-hmm.
this concept of privacy as a company was pretty new. At that time, I had been going back and forth to California a bunch, and I knew I wanted to move back to the Bay, either LA or the Bay at the time. And I had asked O'Melveny to transfer me to San Francisco, and they were the transfer was taking time. At the same time, I was applying to in-house roles from New York. Um, I almost worked for another pod guest, Adam Greenberg at Warby Parker. We super love that guy.
That's a
But
good episode too.
yeah, really good.
These are
Yeah,
all the hits.
yeah. But I interviewed with Vanessa at LiveRamp to be the second attorney under her at LiveRamp. LiveRamp at the time was a subsidiary of a public company called Axiom, which is a 40, 50-year-old Arkansas-based data broker. They had
Mhm.
acquired LiveRamp, which is very much this startup tech company based out of San Francisco, run by really smart guy, Travis May, at the time, and who had hired Vanessa to be the GC of LiveRamp. And so this was an opportunity to work for her. And so the timing worked as such that like I had gotten the offer at LiveRamp the same day, honestly, or almost the same day as I recalled, that my transfer had finally gone through at O'Melveny. And so I had been asking them like weeks after, where's this transfer going? What's going on with the transfer? How come this isn't going through yet? And then they're like, oh, finally we figured it out. I'm like, oh, just kidding. I actually am leaving the firm and I'm going to go start at this data company and in San Francisco. And I think a couple of the partners, the one who I worked for, like totally got it. He wished me the
Yeah.
best. I still keep in touch with them. A couple of other partners were like, what are you doing? Like, this is a huge mistake that you're making. Like,
Really interesting.
yeah.
Huh.
And I said, I appreciate your, thoughts on that. I've enjoyed working for you. I want to take a risk here, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to work. And so, yeah, moved to San Francisco and got the opportunity for work for Vanessa at this high growth subsidiary of a public company where they really kind of like left us alone for a while.
I know that you ended up working on it, and she and I, we danced around this a little bit on our episode because we mostly focused on sort of her experience at Rippling and some of the acquisitions that LiveRamp had done. But you got to work on some pretty complex transactions while you were there, right? I mean, there's a sort of like delisting from NASDAQ that happens, a spin out from Axiom. Can you walk us through a little bit about like what those deals looked like, and did you feel totally comfortable doing that with a sort of capital markets background, or is it very different in house? Like what's the adjustment like to in-house life?
Yeah, I think there are some deals like LiveRamp at the time had done a few more like tuck-in M&A
Yeah.
transactions where we had done smaller, like up to 100, 150 million acquisitions or more of an acqui-hire type motion. And that I did feel more comfortable with. We worked with a really smart chief strategy officer there. And I did take the reins, again, I kind of mostly from Vanessa on that one, where I would work on those, due diligence interviews, kind of the founders, and work with the deal team on that, work with post-transition integration was also a huge thing. I think so many companies think about acquisition, but not about like the deal memo or the deal philosophy and what you're going to do after this deal is closed and how you're going to integrate this totally different company, including systems, customers, contracts, all of these things. And so that I kind of like had a baseline understanding of the transaction where LiveRamp sold Axiom, the parent company. I don't think anyone could have had the like background for that one. It was such a unique deal in the sense that what ended up happening is like we were selling our parent, but we were sitting under like my boss's boss. Vanessa, the boss worked for Axiom. So like at one point you're
Right.
negotiating what's going to stay at LiveRamp, what's going to go to Axiom, and I'm negotiating against my boss's boss, who ultimately like had the ability to, I guess, fire me. So like that structure doesn't work because I'm like pushing hard for LiveRamp against this person who is in my org. It was just very odd, and I think that
That's so interesting.
it was wild. And I think that at what point we had this other lawyer come from Axiom to LiveRamp to help the LiveRamp side, and we were on a call together, and we would be advocating for LiveRamp, and he would be saying like, no way, like on the call, the brother's like, Andrew has no idea what he's talking about this, and I like this guy a lot. No idea what he's talking about, and then he would mute and be like, "You're totally right. I totally agree with you, but I gotta take the other side on this." Like the hell, you know. But we ended up basically selling our parent, and a lot of what was really interesting about the deal was how do we build the systems and infrastructure at LiveRamp in a really short period of time. Like this deal was closing in October. Um, Vanessa was out in the beginning of it, and then back to help close the deal. And she was instrumental, and we worked a ton together during that time to close the deal in October of 2018. We got the opportunity to go to the New York Stock Exchange because we had delisted from NASDAQ. We had listed on NYSE, and be there for the bell ringing, which was so cool. And so that's like the glamour of it, but the behind the scenes of it is like we had no contract management system at LiveRamp because we relied on our parent. There was contracts that were coming over that were 10 years old, that were in PDF, that were not readable. We had to figure out which customers went where. Axiom ended up being one of our biggest customers at the time because of how the deal worked. So a lot of what I was doing was this like intercompany agreement work. What's going to stay? What's going to leave? How are we going to sign up our own contract management system and be able to run as an independent business come October 2018 when we signed the close? And then it was like team building because we had to figure out some folks from the Axiom side on the legal side were going to go to IPG, which is where we sold Axiom to. And some folks were going to come to LiveRamp to work for us. And so just like the team dynamic, how we separated that out, and how we became an independent business during that time was super unique, really interesting transaction, and something I feel like very thankful to be a part of.
Where was it in this journey also, I guess, that you started to pick up privacy expertise, or that you felt like this is a place that I should really lean in? Because I know that ends up becoming a huge part of what you do at Demandbase as well. Curious to hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think truly like at the outset of joining LiveRamp, that was just so core to the business. Like I had joined in 2016, I think, and or 2017, and that was right before GDPR. We needed to make very material changes to the business through GDPR, through CCPA, just based on what LiveRamp does. And the privacy team was run separately, and so it didn't roll up to Vanessa at the time. And I think that I've taken some learnings from that in building my own team at Demandbase from a structure standpoint. But we worked quite a bit with the privacy team, just given the nature of the business. So I feel like I did not, and I do not hold myself out to be a privacy expert, but I think you really have to understand privacy in the Adtech space, and currently in the go-to-market or the MarTech space, just given the type of work that we do. So you always have to be kind of like, have enough knowledge to be dangerous. But I think you also have to understand where do you need to help someone to come in and help you, kind of like bolster that knowledge so that who's gonna complement you so that you know that you have built out the right team and the right foundation for the work that you're doing.
One of the other areas, and you can help me a little bit on the timeline if I don't get it perfectly right, that I thought was interesting was, Vanessa eventually leaves LiveRamp. So for a period of time, you're reporting into the Axiom GC. I mean, I'm curious, like, how does that change the team dynamic? I know Vanessa has a particular leadership style. It's one that I really admire. I'm curious, how do you manage having a different GC as your boss? It's not something that happens, I guess, to folks all that often, maybe because once you're in the GC seat, folks tend to stick around for at least a little while.
Yeah. So that started, I think, not that much long after the transaction. Vanessa left to go join Rippling and obviously see what she's doing there. But I was working for what was the Axiom GC, now the LiveRamp GC, the LiveRamp parent holdco GC. Axiom Axiom was an IPG company. Um, and he was, a Arkansas based, truly like powerhouse Arkansas attorney. Like
Yeah.
everyone in Arkansas knew him. He's, good friends with Bill Clinton type of guy. And he had that type of like Southern drawl, the way he talked that people wanted to listen. And just, I think you can pick up things from different leaders that you want to take on and emulate. And then there's things that you learn that you want to do differently. And so I think I always tell folks, like when they're moving on, or when, if your boss leaves and someone else is coming in, it's an opportunity to learn a totally new set of skills from a new leader, and also learn like what you may want to do differently if you are given the opportunity to lead, right? And so you learn structure. For example, like when I went over to Demandbase, I knew that I wanted the privacy team to be working more closely with like the commercial legal team that we had been doing previously at LiveRamp, and that was something that I was really intentional about. But it's really just kind of like understanding, okay, this is a very different business that had purchased us. This was a very different company, or that the executives that had come over from Axiom
Yeah.
were now much more involved, and their styles were going to be much different. And so how do you navigate that and still get budget and hire and build out a team and get
Hmm.
technology? Like some of the technology asks were challenging in the beginning. I really had to show why we needed a specific tool and how important it was, or why we needed a new head. Like we had done a bunch of work on a ticketing system, for example, on how quickly we pick up agreements, what our response time is, what our turn time is, how many turns it takes to close a deal. We had built all that out, and I used that to be able to say like, hey, we used to be able to pick things up in X amount of days or hours, and now it takes Y amount of days or hours because our business is growing. That's impacting cost time to close. And so I
Hmm.
needed another person on my team to be able to get back to what I believe is the right ratio of time to close. And so those are
Hmm.
some of the ways that you're able to kind of convince someone who may not be as used to that type of thinking initially on how to get something that you're really driving for.
When did the opportunity to lead legal at Demandbase come around for you? And how did that ultimately come together that you were able to convince them to hire you and jump into the GC role?
Yeah. I joined Demandbase in September of 2021. And so at that
Okay.
time, I had spent about 4.5 years at LiveRamp, 2.5 of which as a subsidiary and 2 of which as the public standalone company. And I think, the opportunity came about honestly because someone who I had supported as a commercial attorney at LiveRamp went on to be, at the time, she's no longer here now, but the CRO at the time of Demandbase. And I think that she said, look, here's this attorney that I worked with a bunch, and we navigated partnership deals. We had entered into the TV space during that time, and she led some of that. And these were not, going back to what I said way earlier around kind of like following very specific rules. This was the Wild West. So we had to be really creative on what we were thinking. And so I think if you can establish yourself as a business first creative attorney who's looking to help the business get the deal done or the job done,
Hmm.
then that will pay dividends later on. This was years later where, Demandbase was looking for a GC, and I know she put a good word in for me because she said, look, this is someone that I had worked with before, um, and I think that he would be good here.
That's great. Yeah, I think, of course there's times where you have to hold a line with sales or product or others, but having like a really friendly relationship with those cross-functional stakeholders, I mean, it's not only good for the day-to-day, but it's also maybe good for your long term, right? Some of these folks go on to become CEOs or found their own companies, or yeah. I'm curious, when you joined, the team was pretty small. You inherited a couple of attorneys, compliance. How did you evaluate what you thought the company was going to need as it scaled? And yeah, we can start the conversation there, and then maybe talk a little bit more about scaling the org.
Yeah. I think I was a couple of things. One is I was really transparent in the interview process around my vision on what the team would need. And I think part of it is timing. I was fortunate to be joining in September of 2021. Like, as you know, in September of 2021, early 2022, there was like a million IPOs going on. Everyone was, like the market was really firing. And I think the position of Demandbase was like, we need to become public ready. We want to fit the profile of one of these types of companies. And so I was able to come in and say, okay, you're, I think like 650 people or something at the time. How many people do you have in legal? 2? 1 person in compliance? Well, that's not a public company. That's not what a public company looks like. And so if you want me to come in and lead this team, like, I need to have some leeway and some budget and some bandwidth to hire the team that we would need to have in place to be the company that we want to be. And so I was really honest around, here's the things that I think I'm good at, and here's areas where I would need help. And so privacy is one of them. I said, look, I worked at a company that privacy was core to the business. So I know, I know what it takes. I know how important privacy is going to be to this company. And at the time, right before I joined, Demandbase had made 2 acquisitions, one of which was of a data company. And so privacy was even more important for our business now going forward. And so I said, we cannot be this profile of a company without a true privacy leader. So that's going to be my first hire. I also said, I am a really big believer in legal operations because I've seen tangibly how much it impacts the business. Without legal ops, I would not have been able to make the argument around headcount and ticketing and now AI, but that wasn't even really a thing then. That it's just core to the success, knowledge management, training, all of that stuff starts with legal ops. There's way more that legal ops does. And so those were 2 things that I said at the outset that we need. Privacy, the team got it. They understood. Legal ops, I had to convince them. And once they understood the pitch, they got it. Once we brought in a legal ops person, they really got it. But then I was also able to kind of like right size the org to say, we can't have a compliance team of 1. We need to have more folks than that. And so I was able to build up and make these hires in a fairly short period of time to right size the team for where we wanted to be as a company. So yeah.
I guess along with that sort of like scaling of the team, I guess there's almost like a little bit of, I would say, sort of scaling of self that maybe you have to do as well as you're stepping into what is like your first full GC role. How did you think about that and trying to be sort of self-aware and think about how you might need to grow as a leader in a new leadership role?
Yeah. I think there's 2 things that I think about there. One is that you have, again, to be honest with yourself around areas where you don't have as much experience and where you need to grow that experience. And then you have to say, who can help me do that? And so I think a lot about in my career, this concept of like peer group or mentorship, and like mentors are not always like, hey, will you be my mentor? I think that, like I said, even back at the firm, there was folks who I really learned from, who I felt like I want to get as much work or attach myself to this person as much as possible because I want to soak up what they're telling me. And so things like employment, we had an employment attorney at LiveRamp. I never dealt with employee issues before. Now I run that here at Demandbase. It's something that I think is challenging and interesting. But I asked a peer group. I joined a peer group, and I joined dinners and conferences and things like that where I could meet people. And my mindset was like, go to these things and meet one more new person, right? Who you can build a relationship with. And it's not a transactional relationship. It's not, what can you do for me? But it's like a true relationship. And then once you have that core group, you're able to say, like, has anyone ever seen this before? I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, you have to be honest. I haven't seen this
Yeah.
before. I don't know what to do. Have you seen it? Can you help me through it? And that's a lot of my kind of like go-to initially before I reach out to outside counsel or someone who I'm having to pay for. It's building up this strong network. Like you said, a few of whom have been on this podcast or other
Yeah.
podcasts, right? It's like, these are folks who are super smart, have unique experiences themselves, and you stay in touch with them and you say, hey, this is an issue that I'm dealing with. Have you seen this before? Like, maybe they say no, but I have a buddy at this other, place who has. Let me go ping her, ping him, and that's a new relationship.
You kind of create your own community over time. Yeah. You mentioned, joining in 2020, the market being in place, right? Obviously, and we'll see what happens. I don't think anybody knows what happens even with the market when this episode gets released, what it'll look like.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
But the market around like taking companies public, what investors' expectations are, et cetera, have all really shifted since that point in time. What did that mean for your work, your ability to keep sort of growing the legal org? How did you have to recalibrate maybe some of your own expectations?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that um, I was fortunate. I think that, not that I could have planned for what was happening in 22 or 23, and certainly not that anyone could plan for what's happening today at all. I haven't even looked at the market today, but
Don't. It
I
doesn't.
think, yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, it's not going to help or hurt either way. But I think that there are things that you can do to be a little bit intentional about how you structure a team that could um, help you withstand a lot of things that may or may not occur, right? And so, for example, on the commercial side, there's two things that we do here at Demandbase. One is that we have a strong kind of VP of commercial legal lawyer who leads that function. Um, Underneath him is a contracts manager. It's not a lawyer. I'm a believer in that. I've been a believer in that. I led a team of contracts managers for some time at LiveRamp. You don't need to be a lawyer to be doing that work. Another thing is like, okay, that team is small. What can you take off that team's plate, right? And so we do. We negotiate all of our NDAs through our CLM's AI function. And so I've said this on kind of other talks before, but part of doing that is you as the GC or me as the GC has to say, the way we structured it is basically like, there's a few things that we look out for in these NDAs, and if they are there, it will get kicked to a lawyer. If it's picked up by the AI, it will get kicked to a lawyer. If not, it gets auto signed basically. And so that requires me as the GC to say, I think I'm comfortable with whatever that risk may be, that some things may slip through the cracks and we don't have a quote unquote human in the loop there. And what is the true risk? What's the practical risk? I think that is outweighed by the fact that we don't have lawyers or contract managers dealing with that work, and we have them dealing with the things that are more important. And those things that are more important are actual client customer work, but also like what the next thing we're going to train our AI tool to do. Is it order forms? Is it MSAs? Whatever it may be. And so it's like, how do you think about the team? The other thing that I do is I stretch folks in a way where, like, there's someone on my team who's super smart and he does some privacy work and some GRC work. He has a background and an interest in both. And so he kind of straddles both of those teams. That has been really successful. I will say it isn't always successful. I had someone doing some legal ops work and some commercial work, contract manager work. What ended up happening there was this person who is great, has lasted a year. She left our company because she said, like, I'm really passionate about these legal ops projects. But what ends up happening is I get down the road with them and then I have to stop everything that I'm doing because I have to start towards the end of the quarter dealing with all the commercial stuff. And it's too hard for me to balance that. And I'm like, I kind of thought that might have been the case going in. I wanted to try it. I get it. It in fact didn't work. And now, like, I'm going to resplit those roles again. So you kind of have to, like, test out these things
Mm-hmm.
and see what works and what doesn't. But the theme is you keep the team fairly lean,
Mm-hmm.
to give folks both an opportunity to grow, but also to hopefully keep your costs down so that when you are in these environments where you have to cut, um, you can insulate your team to the
That's
extent that you
great
can.
advice. Yeah. Um, Maybe a last sort of substantive question for you on your time at Demandbase before we get to some fun ones, some closing questions. And I asked this also because you came to our SpotDraft Summit and spoke on one of the panels. Um, how you're thinking about sort of the evolution of your team and the evolution of your function as AI becomes more and more what you're doing. I know that you're a very forward thinker on that, as you mentioned, like with contracts managers, as opposed to needing to have an army of commercial lawyers in house.
Yeah. I think that I don't know. I don't I hope that I'm a forward thinker on that. I think it's so hard to keep up with everything. And I think that I like probably a lot of other folks in my seat or similar seats get pitched on a new AI redlining tool or AI
Sure.
intake tool or whatever, um, weekly, daily, and whatever it might be. And so I think part of it is trying to block out the noise a little bit. Like I heard someone say, I can't remember what it was. I heard another GC say that she takes, I don't do this now, but I think I should. She takes like, I think one call a week on a new vendor that's pitching her to just like see a demo so that she sees what's out there. Like that's an interesting thing to do. What I
That's
try to
smart.
do is, yeah, I think it's really
Yeah.
smart. What I try to do is think about, um, maybe less around kind of like what new tools are out there, although we have tried a couple. We brought something in-house for intake, for example, that we're testing to show kind of like what type of work does a legal, does a GC org do outside of commercial? Because people think a lot about contract metrics, and it's like we do so much more than that. We're getting asked all these things from compliance and privacy and risk. Where else can we show that work? So that's one space that I think is interesting. But a lot of it is, how do you give permission and challenge your team to use the tools that perhaps your company already has? So we have, like many companies, a ChatGPT enterprise license.
Sure.
And so that's key because we don't train on it doesn't train on the data we put in. We don't train on the customer data that may be part of that. But so how do you use it, right? Like someone asks you to analyze an agreement because there's a dispute of that agreement. Load the contract into ChatGPT and say here and write a good prompt. Go and take a prompting class. Like I have now
Mm-hmm.
taken Cecilia's GCAI 101 and 201 prompting classes because I think that
Sure.
that's
Me
going to
too.
be really key. Awesome. Like
Yeah.
that's going to be really key to the success of the function. How do you prompt appropriately? What are the things that I got asked by an auditor to write a memo? Like, okay, here's all the things that I want to go into the memo. And like, maybe I shouldn't say this, but like I loaded it through our enterprise license and it gave me the first draft of the memo. Like, why?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to spend my time writing a memo. And I don't like, and I think that like that's not necessary anymore. So it's less about like what new shiny tool can you sign up for, but how do you convey to your team that you want the team to be using these tools and there's ways to use these tools, and how are we going to do it? So we built it in through our OKR process. Um, I check in on the team, like, what have you done today or what have you done this week around AI work that could be interesting that you can tell others about.
Wow.
So it's just like fielding for curiosity and giving permission to explore
Mm-hmm.
different ways in which we can use the tools that we're given. I don't know what's gonna I mean, I think in the long run I still get pitched and I advise actually for a company that's doing like an AI redlining tool.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that space is really, really interesting. I haven't seen something yet that really blows me away where it
Mm-hmm.
says I don't need lawyers anymore, or
Yeah.
contract managers anymore at my company. And so it's funny because I opened up a role for a contracts manager role in one of these companies took my posting, anonymized it, put it on, or pseudonymized it, as my privacy leader would say. Anonymized, this doesn't exist. Put it on LinkedIn and said, these companies are hiring for contract managers when you could use our tool to do the same thing and it costs way less, like something like that. I'm like making fun of like me and our posting. And I'm like, okay, like I get that, like creative of you. Thank you for not using my company's name, but I just don't know if we're there yet.
Yeah, well, I'm proud of what we're building. I'm proud of the tool that we have and what it does. It's very much been designed with the idea that there is a lawyer or legal professional in the loop. And I don't think that we have an expectation. I don't have an expectation that that's going to be changing anytime in the next 12 months, 18 months. Broadly speaking, I think most sort of folks would agree also that, lawyers who leverage AI, I love that you're asking your teams about how they're using this on like almost a weekly basis or more. Lawyers and legal professionals who leverage AI are going to be massively advantaged in the job market, but it doesn't mean that all the jobs are going to go away either, right? So, yeah. All right. As we come up on time, I've got some closing questions for you. The closing questions that I like to ask all my guests. The first, Andrew, is if you have a favorite part of your day-to-day.
Yeah. I think that what I really like about my job, honestly, is that there isn't, each day could be very different. And so maybe like the diversity at work is my favorite part of my day-to-day. That's kind of like a cop-out answer, but
you are a
again,
lawyer.
like,
it depends.
like harking back to firm days, I think that being in a position where one day you're working on a very strategic partnership, one day you're doing product work, one day you're dealing with an employee issue, one day you're dealing with fundraise, like that, litigation, like being able to have a day where your days, or have a job where your days aren't the same, is really interesting to me. I think that we've been doing a lot of work around, what's also interesting is like the things that fall outside of legal. So I think that having the opportunity to be viewed as not just a legal leader, but as a leader at the company is interesting. And so, we're managing through culture shift and high performance culture, and what does that mean, and how do you set your OKRs to that, and how do you inspire the next line of leaders at your company? Like, that's not a legal problem, but it's a problem that needs to be addressed for our company to be successful. And so I really enjoy thinking about that type of work.
Absolutely. Okay, I think this one's kind of a funny one, and I have no idea what your answer is going to be. Do you have a professional pet peeve?
Yeah. I have kind of like a silly one, and I have more of a real one. I think like the like sillier one is, and folks at my team and know this, I hate weather talk. And so like a lot of times you get on like a Zoom, particularly like with people who don't work a lot together, and it's like, oh man, it looks beautiful out there. Yeah, it's 75. Like, how about you? Oh, it's super cold here in Chicago. I hate that. Like, it just feels like if we're gonna do the small talk, let's small talk something else.
I am guilty of that all the time.
but I think like I tend to go, the flip side of that is when I get on calls, I get my Zoom personality, I think, is a little bit different. Like I go straight to the point, and I've been given feedback that like sometimes you have to do the little bit of like chit chat and small talk in the beginning. And weather talk is a good way to fill that. It's just something I don't like. I even think it's more real is I took a lot of pride, and I take a lot of pride as when someone asks me to do something and I say, I got this, that I'm going to do it. And so my professional pet peeve is when I'm asking that of others, cross-functionally on my team, whatever, is like, I have faith that when you say, I got this, I'm going to handle it, you got it. And so, um, it's great when I don't have to follow up, but if I follow up more than one time, like that is actually, um, I'm like, oh, well, maybe you don't got it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if you set the deadline, you say you got it. Like I believe that you were going to do that because that's something that I try to live by.
Absolutely. Is there a book that you'd recommend for the audience?
Yeah. So I saw that you asked that earlier, and I was thinking about it. There's a few. They're not.
Great.
They're not like tech necessarily. I have one sort of techie book, but um, two books that I really liked recently. One is that a lot of folks have read is Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. I have three little kids. I have a 5.5-year-old and I have 2.5-year-old twins. And so it's not as much about my children's generation. It's a lot about like Gen Z, but it's about how devices and the use of device. It's basically a juxtaposition of how we have vastly underregulated devices for our kids and overregulated the real world in the sense that like kids aren't just like walking around going to town by themselves or they're being monitored and tracked. And I think he sets this in like a very like Malcolm Gladwell kind of Ian data driven way to show kind of those juxtapositions and what we could do about it. And I just find it really fascinating. And it's something that kind of like young parents of my generation, I think, are talking about. How are we going to do something differently for kids our age? That's one. Another one on a more personal level is this book called Crying in H Mart. I don't know if
Oh,
you've
I
heard about
haven't
that.
read it, but I've seen it in the bookstore and I've seen it on friends'
Okay.
bookshelves, and it gets all sorts of accolades. Yeah.
Yeah. So the author is, I was just make sure I knew her name before this, is Michelle, I think it's Zauner. She happens to be also the lead singer of a band called Japanese Breakfast, which is an awesome band, really great band. I really love them. But she basically writes this book about um, losing her mom to cancer and how she dealt with it and how it kind of structured her childhood, her relationship with her family, how she thinks about her own around time and her own passions. Um, and yeah, it's a book that really resonated with me. I lost my mom when I was in my early 20s. I think I sang earlier, I left school to go take care of her. And so I think that like um, it it's something that has definitely obviously defined my life, but defined the way in which I think about time and how I want to spend my time. And so it's a thread that has played out through my whole certainly life, but career too, in the sense that like even going back to that O'Melveny interview, I was asked like something along the lines of like, how important is this job for you? Like, and I think my answer was like, look, this is a really important job and an opportunity, but I've been through a bunch of other stuff in my life that is actually important. So like, I want this, but if I don't get it, it's okay, type of thing. And so I think it just helps. It helps set your foundation. So that I think is a really great book. The last one on a more techie one is I just finished Elon Musk by Walter Isaacson, and I am not a like Musk super fan or anything like that, but I do think that his this concept of first principles, challenging everything, challenging the requirement, asking like, why is this way? And specifically like, who made this way? And it's not just that the legal department made it this way. It's Andrew in the legal department made it this way. Okay, go talk to Andrew. Why did you say this thing? I think is a really interesting way of thinking. And particularly around like the SpaceX and Tesla stuff, all of these things that he is challenging, it's just like really amazing to see what has come from that. So those are three books that I think are worth reading.
Those are great recommendations. I'll have you back for just more book recommendations. We can do a whole blog post together.
Sounds good.
who knows if I'll even have to ask this question after the second book recommendation that you gave, but this is my traditional closing question for my guests. And I want to ask it to you too, Andrew. It's if you could look back on your days as a young lawyer, maybe just joining O'Melveny, something that you know now that you wish that you'd known back then.
Yeah. I think it's getting out of comparison. I'll call it comparison culture. And I am still guilty of this today. And I think it's something you're constantly having to work on, which is you don't know where your career you can shape your career in a lot of ways. Like, this is what I'm looking for. I want to be the small team. I want to do because I want a big impact. I want to do this and that. But I think that if you spend a lot of time looking around law school or the firm or whatever and say, this person is more successful for me than me, or this person has got this and I don't have this, it's a lot of noise, honestly. And so I think that if you can, like, acknowledge it as something maybe to drive you because you're driven, but not spend a lot of your time thinking about, how do I look more like this person or get this or compare yourself to that, and just focus on what are the things that you really want to get out of your career or work, while still, like I said, like, having people to be somewhat of like a North Star. I think that is a healthier way to go about this career and, frankly, life.
That's a great sentiment to end on. Andrew, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of The Abstract.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great. I really appreciate it.
And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.